Do you live or know someone who lives in the Denver metro area that needs heating or air conditioning services? Tell them the Be Heat and AC is the company to call, because we are the only company that comes out for free for all first-time customers. And if you want a second opinion for any of our advice, we send out the competition at our expense. We pay their service call up to $69. That's right, we pay their service call for you to get a second opinion. And if you enjoyed the content in this video, please guys, for the algorithm, like this video, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so that we can keep bringing you daily and weekly HVAC content that's pertinent for you, so you can have a more comfortable, fulfilling life. What's up guys, welcome to the show. Ladies and gents, we're going to talk about the dopest AC on the planet today. That's the Daikin Fit. Second maybe to the VRV Life, which we have one here. We also have one at our office, and I'm going to kind of be showcasing what these do and why they're awesome and why you need one. But basically, if you're in the market for a new AC, the reason we recommend the Daikin Fit over anything else, so this is a traditional, I'll pull this over so you can see it. This is not hooked up, but this is just a traditional, I think this one's a 13 SEER. But it's just a basic AC that you're used to seeing. Yeah, this is a 13, I'd say. So this is a basic 13 SEER AC, and when you think of air conditioning, this is typically what you think of. You think of the box outside with the fan on the top, versus something like this, unless you live in Europe. This looks similar to a mini split, which is like the head units that you see on the wall behind us. And then you might be used to seeing ACs that look like this, but I'm going to talk about the pros of getting an AC like this versus just like a traditional AC. And we're actually going to show you some technical aspects of what's actually happening in terms of how this is efficient or more efficient. But the number one thing I want to point out is that this is running right now. And so you can't hear it, like barely. I'm standing right here, we're having a conversation. Whereas if this was running, this is actually still a pretty relatively quiet unit compared to what you're traditionally used to, because it is a newer system, so it has a newer ECM condensing fan motor. And so it's still quieter, but nothing like this. And the difference between a standard 13 SEER system or a 16 SEER system and a Daikin Fit is that this is an inverter, which essentially is a variable speed compressor. And so the difference between the two is that this is kind of an all or nothing system. So when it first kicks on, it's going to be on 100%, and then when it kicks off, it's off 100%. Whereas an inverter or a variable speed system is going to ramp up along a continuum slowly. And so that's what, for obvious reasons, that's what makes it a lot more energy efficient. And one of the things I want to talk about is something that's going on right now in regard that's affecting these in their what's called energy efficiency rating. So if you're in the market for a new AC, just to kind of give you the rundown of the difference between, because you've probably heard things like SEER ratings and or EAR ratings or EER, and what a SEER rating is it stands for Seasonal Energy Efficiency Ratio. And what that's actually measuring, or what that is that's a rating that's given to a specific unit based on its efficiency during peak operation periods or peak season. So if it's an air conditioner, that would obviously be in the summer, and then the higher the SEER rating, the more efficient it is. So you could think higher SEER is better. And an EER rating is energy efficiency ratio, and so it's the same thing, it's just not seasonally adjusted, and what that means is that's overall how efficient it is year-round. Now, one of the things that's interesting about how the AHRI Institute rates these systems, or specifically inverters. So it's true for this system and also true for the VRV Life or any of the VRV products, which is a variable refrigerant flow product. And I'll explain that here and show you kind of the mechanics of what goes into those if you're also considering a VRV Life system. But what's weird is that the EER rating, so right now there happens to be a rebate program through Denver, and that rebate program is, I forget what it's called, but it's basically it's called the Climate Action Program, and it has, it's specifically very large rebates that are targeted at the heat pump market. And what's unique is that Daikin Fit, or also has a heat pump version. But the heat pump version actually doesn't qualify for the rebate, even though it's far superior in terms of efficiency. It uses less power, it's better for the grid, and I'm going to explain why in a second. But if you have a single stage 16 SEER heat pump, that actually qualifies for a rebate, whereas this doesn't. And the rebate, and it's almost up. The rebates, we just got an email that it's about to expire on the 24th of June, so there's not many funds left. But the rebate was substantial. It was upwards of $5,000. But for them to not give it on a Daikin Fit heat pump and to offer it on a 16 SEER single stage heat pump is absolutely absurd. And I'm going to show you, we have some tools hooked up. This is an amp clamp, and I'm going to show you what we're measuring and what that is and how it's an articulation or an expression of how efficient it is, because we're actually measuring the juice that so to speak, that the system is pulling, or how much power it's consuming on a minute-by-minute basis, and also the demand and the stress that's on the grid. And in a little bit, when we go back to the shop and I do a side-by-side, so I show you what a 16 SEER system, and it's actually one of our competitors, but this is the Lennox Regret series. But if you want Regret, you can buy one of those. But we're going to do a side-by-side, and I'm going to show you mechanically like how different it is. You're going to hear it. It's obviously a lot louder, not as comfortable. And then you're going to see the difference in terms of the power it's pulling. So as you can see, the system just kicked on, and what I want to showcase basically is you've got, right now when a normal system kicks on, it's pulling, depending on the tonnage, it's going to be pulling between 10 and 35 amps. Right now this just kicked on, and the inrush current is barely at 1.7, 1.8 amps, and that's the benefit of an inverter. So this whole concept right now with the rebate program and the AHRI certificates and having a low EER rating on an inverter like this is just absolutely absurd, because you can see physically the amount of power it's pulling. So now we're at 2.8 amps. So it's ramping up slowly compared to, and we're going to show you, this is the 13 SEER like I said, and so we're going to show you the type of power that this thing pulls when it first kicks on, and so you can see the difference. And we don't actually have this one hooked up, and it's actually not even going to be a Daikin. It's going to be one of the competitors that we have set up behind the shop. It's actually one of our neighbors' AC, so don't tell them we're pulling it apart if you see this video. But or if you see this video, you can tell them their AC sucks and they need to buy a Daikin Fit. So like I said, we were going to show you guys basically a standard 13 or 16 SEER type system, so you can see the difference in terms of how much power it pulls. So we showed you the Daikin Fit. We had the amp clamp hooked up, and you could see that it started up around 1.2 amps, and even after it had been running for about 15 minutes, it was still barely pulling, 2.5, almost 3 amps. I don't think it ever hit 3 amps. It was about 2.5. But here we are, this system, it's, like I said, it's a single stage system, and if you look consistently while it's running, it's going to be pulling 9 amps the entire time that it's running. So 9 amps compared to 3 amps is a direct reflection of the amount of power that's being pulled and the stress that it's putting on the grid and on the electrical system, compared to, it's literally 3 times the amount of power that inverter was pulling. And it's what you think of when you think of like a traditional AC. This, like I said, isn't terribly noisy, but it's definitely noisier. You can definitely hear the difference between this system and the Daikin Fit, which you, even inside, where things would echo and reverberate and stuff, you didn't hear the Daikin Fit hardly at all. So that's the difference, and again, that's why we really wanted to hook up our gauges so you could see the difference in terms of the amount of power it's pulling, because this is literally, it's using more energy, and you can see that just with some basic measurements. And back to the AHRI program, or the AHRI Institute, I think it's an institute, whatever. Anyways, and the Denver rebate program, the problem with the rating system and why they're not qualifying these for a rebate, but they are qualifying just a basic 16 SEER system for a rebate. And the problem with that, and how it's actually going to be, in my opinion, creating a bigger problem for the grid itself, if you really want to impact, because what they're trying to do is obviously decarbonization, which ultimately from a sustainability perspective and long term, that's the direction things need to go. It's better for the environment, it's cleaner, there's less smog in cities. Obviously that's where it's at, and if you have a heat pump that doesn't consume any fossil fuels, currently most of our energy on the grid is still provided by coal. But if you put solar panels on your house and throw in a heat pump, you could essentially be off the grid completely and heat and cool your house from solar, and especially if you have a battery bank, you're literally completely off the grid. So that's similar to like the Tesla Powerwall, and there's some other products out there that are similar to that. But when we show you the other system, the problem is that with this rebate program that they're offering right now is a 16-SEER system, and this is a 2-ton Daikin Fit. This is a 2-ton. Like I said, this is a 13-SEER, but the 16 is almost looks identical. The difference between this one and this one on startup is that this, like I said, pulls about 1.2 amps when it first starts. And like I said, right now it's been running about 15 minutes. It's at 2.7 amps. When this first kicks on, it's going to be pulling about 12 amps when it first kicks on. And so that puts a much higher stress on the grid. You have to think of it essentially as literally pulling power. So imagine someone's pulling on a rope, and imagine this is literally pulling 10 times the tension, or it's pulling 10 times the juice through the wire. What actually happens, so I don't know if you've ever lived in the city or live in a city, and this is anywhere in the world, but if you've ever experienced like a blackout on your neighborhood and you've heard a transformer blow, you'll hear an explosion down the street, and what it is it's a transformer that's stepping down power basically at the power lines. And because there's too much power being pulled by appliances, which is often air conditioners running, and then your fridge kicks on and everything else, and then a whole block, there's too many people running their air conditioners that are inefficient, too. And then all of a sudden, the power goes out. And so the problem with decarbonization with the wrong equipment, which like I said, a 16-SEER, if that's all you can afford, there's nothing wrong with that. Go with a 16-SEER option. It's definitely going to be more efficient than what you have now. But in terms of the pressure that it puts on the electrical grid, there's a lot of, they might say this is not true. There's a lot of, if you do research on the internet, there's a lot of energy companies out there saying, no, that's not the case. The grid can actually sustain it. But the fact of the matter is, regardless of whether or not it can sustain it, it's putting a lot more pressure on it. Whereas this, on startup, pulling 1.2 amps, and then ramping up to, like I said, now it's pulling 2.8 amps, versus being a system that's pulling 12 and it's either on or it's off. This is obviously going to be much better, because you have to think, if you had 100 of these, just doing simple math, if you had 100 of these on one block and they were running at the current capacity that they are now, which the AC is on, this is running in AC mode, that would be consuming 280 amps on the entire block. Whereas if you had 100 of the 16-SEER system, which is more efficient than the last generation of technology, which was like 10 and 12 SEER systems. Those are the systems that are approaching that 20-year age mark. In terms of, it's going to be more efficient than that, but 100 16-SEER systems would essentially be pulling 1,000 amps anytime they're on. Whereas this is going to ramp up and down. And so that's why an inverter is a much better system for the grid. It's a much better system for solar. And then the benefit too, and like I said, we'll show you a VRV system and how that works. The benefit of a VRV is that it's the same technology that the Daikin Fit has, but it allows you to connect to multiple system and multiple head units, so that way you can get zoned comfort in a home or in a commercial building. You can get zoned comfort and get several units cooling off of one condenser. And same thing, because it's a variable speed compressor and it ramps up and down, it's going to be pulling a lot less power, because it's, imagine having a car that went 0 miles per hour or 100 miles per hour, and that was it. It'd be, 100 miles to the light, stop. 100 miles to the, stop sign, stop. And it'd be extremely jerky. That's what's happening on the electrical grid, in terms of the power that it's consuming and pulling. Whereas this is how cars that we drive nowadays are used to, where you accelerate and you go from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100, versus just doing one or the other, on or off. So in a nutshell, that's that's really why we recommend the Daikin Fit. But the biggest thing is just from a comfort perspective. So this actually, in terms of what you can expect as far as like savings compared to a traditional system, like a single stage system, in my experience, you're going to see somewhere around 30%. It depends on your comfort level, where you set things, how hot the summer is. Obviously, all those things are going to adjust, but it's literally, as we showed you with the measurements in terms of the amperage, it's pulling a lot less power, it's consuming less energy. And although it will run a lot longer, the reason it runs longer is because you don't hear it, and it's running at a lower capacity versus just running at, you know, full bore versus or being, you know, completely off. So you're going to get more even temperature distribution throughout your home, and that's the reason I love these things. We put in all sorts of systems, from, you know, basic systems for apartment complexes, for rentals, for people that maybe really just want the basic system. And in that environment, I don't know that I would recommend a Daikin Fit, just because it's not really needed. But if you do pay the electric bill in a facility like that, obviously you want the most efficient stuff. But this is an extremely, even though it's a more advanced piece of technology, it's extremely reliable. We rarely have issues with these. And once we install them, like I said, I've never had a customer complain and regret getting a Daikin Fit like they do when they buy other systems. So remember, unless you want a life of regret, buy a Daikin Fit. In another survey, crime statistics data show that Daikin Fits increase safety in your community